Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Andrea Gilli, who is a lecturer at the University of St. Andrews and an expert on technological aspects of modern warfare. Welcome, Professor Gilli.
Thank you, good morning, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you so much. You are observing this Russo-Ukrainian war since its very start, not even 3 years ago, but 10 years ago. You have seen a lot of development in the warfare. Many say now that the war is in a sort of a stalemate when the sides cannot break through the defensive lines, and no significant development is being observed on the battlefield. Is it true? Are the sides out of technological supremacy and cannot achieve their goals?
Well, that's a very important question. It's obviously a complex issue. A stalemate is a summary, probably is a simplification, because a stalemate for a stalemate to occur, we should observe total or fairly stand-still positioning of the troops, which is not occurring. Also is not fully a stalemate from my perspective, for a simple reason, because we are seeing that Russia is trying to break through, or was trying to break through, and it failed, most recently around the Kharkiv. So I would not totally agree with a stalemate, which is mostly a product not of the fighting tactics, but more of the different availability of resources among the two fronts, especially Ukraine, as we know, is much more constrained. What I think is interesting in this particular phase is that some of the problems Russia has been experiencing since basically the beginning are still present. So the relative difficulty of advancing, of launching combined attacks is not fully working on the Russian side. There's also still problems of training, and even what was being discussed, I would say, from early this year. So the capacity to innovate and improvise and do better fire control and synchronize movements among different types of troops, it seems that it was not able to give a fatal blow to the Ukrainian defensive, fortunately. At the other end, there's obviously a problem from the Ukrainian side, which in that case has been solved with the new shipment of weapons, which has addressed a vulnerability which definitely weakened Ukraine for not 1 year, but at least several months. Obviously, from here to the next phase is difficult to say. What is positive news is that we see that for instance, the salaries paid to new recruits in Russia in some regions are increasing dramatically, which suggests that there's a growing scarcity of recruits or troops from Russia, and this is to a certain extent positive, because it means for Russia the cost of the war are increasing. If we take these with the new wave of sanctions, which even officials in Russia are discussing, are claiming it are a deadly blow to the Russian economy, and probably I would say also some political considerations, because why comes that Russia wants to launch constantly all these attacks and doesn't wait in order to group stronger and bigger bigger formations to try to launch larger attacks? It suggests that they probably feel the political tempo or the political window may be closing or may be worsening over time. So obviously these are speculations.
That is indeed what many observe here when Russians tried to increase the level of their attacks before the so-called Victory Day, which they celebrate on the 9th of May, or because the so-called presidential election, which they had this spring. And my contacts on the front line confirmed me that couple of weeks before both dates, the level of attacks increased, and then like next day, 2 days after, they dropped. That means that the Russians really tried to achieve some result to a certain date. That's actually nothing new. That is what the Red Army was doing all the time in World War II, trying to conquer the enemy's strongholds for the certain date, like October Revolution anniversary or 1st of May. That when we talk about the development on the front line, this war is different to any war which the West prepared to fight because, for example, none of the sides can fully use air force. And there is like no such thing as dogfights in the air. The Air Force doesn't operate over the territory controlled by another side. But at the same time, we have drones. So what is different in this aviation part of the war?
Well, thanks. So that's an important question, and I've been working a bit on drones with some academic publications, but also last year I was working with the Italian Air Force, which was celebrating its 100th anniversary, and so for that reason, I went through once again through the history of military aviation in the 20th century, and we can say a few things. I would start from the very beginning. The lack, for different reasons, of the use of advanced jet fighters has definitely played a big role in the war. I mean, fortunately, Russia could not use an advanced air force at the beginning because probably this could have depleted some of the land forces of Ukraine, making the resistance and the following counteroffensive much harder to make. And so that's definitely an important aspect. At the same time, the lack of an advanced air force from the Ukrainian side means that all the advances, all the long-range strikes and other types of operations were either not available or limited in scope, in number, in reach. And I think any lesson for current future conflicts is about the importance of modern air power. The second aspect of air power is about air defenses, I think, which is absolutely fundamental. So let me get straight. In some countries, air defenses are under the command of air forces. In other countries, are under the command of land forces. But still, we're talking of air capabilities. And I think what the war has really ignited is that air defense is an utmost necessity and can perform excellently, especially Western systems. So I just read in the news that the US and Israel are trying to triangulate to send 8 Patriot batteries to Ukraine. I read quickly through the Wall Street Journal earlier, and I think this should be the news. Maybe it's not totally correct, the number, but that's the idea, and it's positive because the capacity to destroy long-range targets far away from the front is very important, meaning Russia can force Ukraine to move troops away from the front lines in order to be on the rear and protect relevant targets. Can be headquarters, can be civilian infrastructure, can be other military equipment, and so forth. And so air defenses are fundamental. Obviously, these highlights one long-standing aspect, which is about allowing Ukraine to strike targets within Russian territory. Because if we don't allow Ukraine to strike targets within Russia, obviously, Russia doesn't have to worry about its soft spots and can put all its forces exactly on the front line. So just at the strategic level, that's relevant. And then we arrive to the last point of your question about drones. I think that what we've seen in Ukraine is a mix of new and old. And it's obviously there are ongoing developments, and it's difficult to monitor day by day. But we can say a few things, which are, first of all, drones, especially small drones, are making the last mile of the front line extremely vulnerable, because now we have basically an enhanced sniper capability, which is potentially many kilometers away, also a standoff from areas which are remote, covered, and so forth. So the front line, the last mile, is really lethal, and this requires anybody fighting toe to toe with the enemy to carry also organic anti-drone capabilities. So we're seeing the US Army, for instance, is thinking about equipping all its land forces at the unit level with some organic anti-drone capability. And Ukraine, I think, for a set of reasons, including making a necessity out of its weakness, the lower number of forces it possesses, had to rely more on systems like drones, and that's one aspect. The small drones in particular. Related, which is, and there was an article on the Financial Times a few days ago from, I don't remember the person, but he's a Ukrainian who has been following all the startups and innovation related to drones in Ukraine. What we're seeing is that the cycles of innovation can be compressed and deliver effective systems in relatively short time at short cost, which can still make a tactical difference. And that's definitely something everybody is paying attention to, the point that also Russia has made some, it was able to use in some ways drones, and especially, as I was mentioning earlier, to use them to coordinate fires for its attacks. The other aspect which is relevant to drones is probably related to long-range intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, which means in order to strike a target, you need to know whether there's a target, what is the target, and confirm that is exactly the target. Now, if something stands 10 meters away from me, identification, it's easy. If something stands 1,000 kilometers from me, obviously, I need to be able to monitor it at long distance. And that's what drones can do, but also satellites can do as well. And that's one relay. I mean, at the end, a satellite is just a drone, which is much higher in altitude and does, especially if it's in low orbit, it stands still and moves basically together with the gravitational forces of the Earth, but still is able to capture images on the ground. And that's a key change with respect to the past, that the battlefield, we have generally a possibility to know much more in detail for much longer what is happening on the battlefield, and for that reason we're also able more rapidly and more effectively to strike. And that's a main change. And here I would really put together drones and satellites, because it's the same type of ISR package, although at different levels. Ukrainians have been using some drones, but we know also that NATO is using his AGS, a light ground surveillance, a light ground system in flying over the Black Sea for gathering intelligence. The last aspect that drones have probably made a difference, in contrast to what others, scholars, my colleagues in particular, were saying over the past 10 years, is the capacity to launch long-range strikes. So we have not seen drones totally replacing air forces yet. I mean, we have seen a lot of tactical attacks, but the drones cannot replace fleets of jet fighters. But what Ukraine in particular has shown that is possible is to launch strikes at 500, 700, I think in some cases even almost 1,000 kilometers away, which in terms of kinetic effects, we're probably relatively limited. Meaning, because obviously there's so much you can package over a drone, and so the warhead was limited. But in terms of psychological effects, were definitely important, because these brought the war away from the front and well into Russian territories, signaling the Russian population that the war is not only being fought in Ukraine, is the war is between Ukraine and Russia, and that some targets can be attacked also there. But the other aspect is that it connects to what I was saying earlier, that by launching these relatively long-range strikes, Ukraine is basically forcing Russia to move away investments from capabilities in the front lines to anti-drone capabilities well in the rear, which is something we generally want to do. I mean, in a simple equation, if I have $100 and I know my adversary won't attack my rear, I can put all the $100 to attack on the front lines. But if I know that my enemy is going to attack me on the rear, well, 10, 20, 30, 50%, I don't know, but it has to be invested not on the attack, but on the defense, which in turn makes the offense harder, and that's what we want to do. And so these are the three main areas.
And before we go further to the aspects of drones warfare and how other technological aspects affect the Russo-Ukrainian war, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel so you will not miss interviews like this one. And we are talking with Professor Andrea Gilli, who is a lecturer at the University of St. Andrews. You have already mentioned this dilemma between like long-range strikes and the Russians believe that they can control the front line and live a calm and peaceful life, if we can call it so, behind, like in the rear parts of the of the Russian Federation. But now Ukrainians strike them with drones, and also on the front line. We have like some units, which I personally visited a couple of days ago. They say like they consume like 3,000 drones a month, which is of course top limit, and other units consume less of them. But it's still like it's hundreds and hundreds of drones flying over pretty small parts of the front line every day. But isn't it effectively the way how to compensate other types of weapons? For the long-range strikes, I would imagine that the Ukrainians would prefer to strike Russian refineries or other high-value targets with cruise missiles. They have a larger payload, they fly with higher velocity, they have more kinetic effect, they are simply better than a 200-kilogram warhead slow-flying propeller airplane transformed to drone. The same with the close combat. I'm pretty sure that a Ukrainian commander of a platoon would gladly call for air support of like some A-10 Thunderbolt or an artillery strike with devastating effect on the Russian army, instead of hunting each single Russian soldier with an individual FPV drone. So are the drones just a substitution for something which Ukraine doesn't have, and will continue to be that as a weapon of under-equipped armies, or do they show a quite new way of fighting a war?
That's a good question. I think probably the answer is a bit of both, depending on the context, depending on the capability. Meaning, definitely the over-reliance, the significant reliance on drones probably stems from the fact that Ukraine lacked some key capabilities. Just out of curiosity, I went mapping arms deliveries to Ukraine before the war. You know, there was, I'm from Italy, I was living in Italy at the beginning of the conflict, and on Italian TV there was constantly the mantra that the war was provoked by NATO because we provided so many weapons to Ukraine, which was in turn a threat to Russia. And I was like, really? And I went checking what NATO countries sold to or gave to Ukraine in the period 2014-2022. And basically there was no air defense, no jet fighter, no long-range artillery, no helicopters, and basically no long-range munitions. So Ukraine started basically with only what its defense industry could produce, or with the capabilities it inherited from the post-Soviet times for different reasons, which, with all due respect, was limited in terms not only of numbers but also in terms of scope. And so, given that new supplies were not coming, we remember providing tanks would lead to nuclear war, providing cruise missiles would lead to nuclear war, and all those fears. So there was hesitation, and so Ukraine had to find substitutes, and drones ended up being a substitutes for many of those capabilities in different ways. So we don't have long-range cruise missiles, we use long-range drones. We don't have close air support capabilities, helicopter, airplanes, we use drones. We don't have other type of capabilities, we use drones. And so that's definitely this dimension. And I think to some extent, this can explain why in some phases, in some moments, Ukrainian forces struggle, because there's so much you can do. I mean, if I need a motorbike and I have only a bicycle, I can do whatever I can, but at some point I won't reach the speed of a motorbike. And here, there's probably this capability substitution proves some criticalities. But at the same time, what Ukrainians showed is that there's definitely a much more, by combining together these capabilities, you can still create a lot of attrition and able to resist what is a large munition-heavy adversary. And that's definitely correct. Obviously, your question was, as a frontline theater commander, would I not prefer to have close air support to strike individual enemy force packages rather than individual soldiers? Obviously, probably yes. But still, what the drones used by Ukraine proved that you can still slow down dramatically the advance with drones. The question, which is obviously difficult to answer, is how much, in terms, unfortunately, of Ukrainian blood this calculation is. Because obviously, if this drone-heavy approach has one implication is that it leads to higher casualties for Ukraine, and that's possible because there's the Russian advancing forces cannot be slowed down significantly fast. It's possible that it has a real cost, and that's why me and many others have been calling for more support to Ukraine in terms of heavy weapons from the very beginning. The last thing I want to say on drones is about two different issues. One is their growing vulnerability, or their vulnerability to electronic warfare, meaning drones still rely on sensors, communications. They have internally electronic devices, which in different ways can be neutralized through mostly electronic warfare capabilities. And so the heavy usage of drones by Ukraine is also a product of this fact. So you use so many knowing that a good chunk will be made ineffective by enemy capabilities. At the end is a bit how warfare evolves, meaning if we think about World War I, how many bullets were being used? I mean, an insane amount. And so we end up just trying to develop new concepts of operations, then new technologies in order to weigh around this massive employment of bullets, and so to make war less bloody, more precise, and so forth. Here, I think we are in a similar phase. It's for now it works, but obviously as electronic magnetic capabilities spread, they even improve. The use of drones may require a leapfrog in capabilities, and that's probably where in a few years' time we'll be. Hopefully not in Ukraine, because I hope by then Ukraine to be over and with all its territory. But obviously, it does not depend on me.
Now, I absolutely love your comparison to the World War One in the development of different types of guns. We still remember this debate when, like, many generals who preferred the to arm their soldiers with single-shot rifles, they were opposing automatic guns, saying that it would provoke the soldiers not to aim precisely, and they will waste a lot of ammunition, which maybe sometimes is the case, but still it's better to fire like 100 bullets and kill one enemy than to fire like 10 bullets and kill no enemy. So after all, it's about your productive capacities, and if you can create the level of fire which will suppress or destroy your enemy, or you cannot. And so the first one win the wars, and the second ones lose the wars. With the drones, it's obviously the same. But speaking of drones, and especially FPV drones, which are being used for all purposes now in Ukraine, from communication, like deliveries, bombers, FPVs, kamikaze drones, and other type of drones. Can you imagine that these drones will be used on a normal standard level by NATO armies who have enough of other types of ammunition? Will they be a supplement to the to weapon systems, which, for example, a platoon commander has, which theoretically can increase the firepower of his platoon?
Let's put it this way. My opinion matters up to a certain point, but there are trends and dynamics which suggest that what you're saying is in part happening. Meaning, so in the US, they launched last September a program called the Replicator. And the idea is to generate a lot of relatively small and cheap drones to operate in swarms together with traditional jet fighters, and in this way create a huge volley of targets, which the enemy would be impossible for the enemy to take them all down. And that's one signal that we are going a bit in that direction. Now, I read the other day on a specialized magazine, I think it was Defense One, maybe it's another one, that was saying that for this program, the Replicator, one idea was to use the Switchblade, exactly the small kamikaze drone. Now, we are in the experimentation phase. There's no contract yet. It's not even given that this program will succeed. In the US, many defense procurement programs and that being canceled at some point. But it just points that all these suggest that even the US is thinking about integrating relatively small and cheap drones, not to fight alone, but to be employed with other capabilities in order to put together mass and cheap costs along with high-end, what are called exquisite capabilities, and generate basically an advantage in terms of both quality and quantity. And so that's a first aspect. I think then a few weeks ago, the Baltics and Poland, if I'm not wrong, they spoke about creating a wall of drones as near defense, as a defensive line on the Eastern Front. And this seems to suggest a similar dynamics. The idea is while NATO is implementing its new force model, revisiting its family of deterrence, defense, and regional plans. It modernizes force structure, its command structure, and so forth. What to do next? It seems, at least from what I read, that these countries, which three of which are are relatively small, the three Baltics, are thinking to use drones to create high attrition, especially at the beginning of an eventual Russian advance, so to slow it down sufficiently that other NATO allies can step in and help them with an eventual defense. So it seems that what we are seeing in Ukraine is being looked at with attention and being used to generate lessons and update existing, we can call it, defense policies. Obviously, the specific execution will depend a lot on how much money a country has, its comparative advantages, including the geography, the distance from the front, but it definitely seems to be informing at least some relevant NATO countries.
And that is what is happening now in Ukraine. It's the first war since decades, which is being fought against a modern army. Like, we can be as much as skeptical against the capacities of the Russian army, but it's still a modern army which uses all types of modern equipment. Naval vessels, jets, strategic bombers, rocket artillery, and so it is not comparable to any war that NATO led within the last couple of decades. Afghanistan and other missions, maybe the Gulf War against Saddam's army, which was equipped also with all types of weapons, but really old ones. So there was not really a comparison to what Russian army has now. Russian army is not the best army in the world as we know it. It's second best army in Ukraine, but it is still well equipped and has a lot of equipment which they can allow themselves to be destroyed in Ukraine to achieve some details. So the tactics and strategies are developing now in front of our eyes, and the Ukrainians are practically developing them. But speaking about the Russia's capacities, we have seen growing dependency of Russia from weapons deliveries from the countries which do not look to be the top of technological progress. We speak about Iran, but recently much more about North Korea. The Russians have recently got the next batch of artillery shells from North Korea, which are practically Soviet-produced artillery shells, which have been sent to North Korea during the Soviet era. We're talking now about 130 millimeter caliber, pretty rare caliber for the Soviet army, for the guns produced in end of 1940s. So probably these shells have been produced under Joseph Stalin and sent to his front to North Korea. Now they're back to Russia to be used against Ukraine. How much of dependency does it demonstrate for the Russian army, and what does it say us about the technological level of fighting this war?
That's a good question, and I think it's difficult to answer in a comprehensive way because it touches upon multiple issues. To simplify with one word, is the globalization of defense production. So I think we can at least trying to make some informed speculations about the fact that Russia is buying weapons, munitions from two countries like Iran and North Korea. So just to put in context, Russia is considered from a global perspective not a rich country. It's a relatively total, small economy over a relatively large population, which makes its GDP per capita not a wealthy country. Iran and North Korea are definitely considered Iran a developing country. North Korea probably cannot be even qualified because it's basically a laggard has been a laggard since the end of the Korean War in 1953. So these are definitely backward countries. The fact that Russia depends on them for artillery shells or drones, suggests that something is going on. And what is going on? We can try to identify some possible explanations. And I think One possible factor is the role of sanctions, which have made harder for Russia to acquire goods like machinery tools to produce artillery shells, or to drill more metals, for instance. And so for that reason, they cannot produce even something which is fairly simple. And that's one explanation that has to do with sanctions. The other possible explanation is that Russia doesn't have surge capacity, so have a problem similar to what the Europeans have, meaning its defense industry nowadays has the capacity to produce X number of artillery shells per month, but it's very hard to increase because it's lacking issues like specialized personnel, raw materials, machineries, and so forth. Or the time would be relatively long. And I think also this plays a role. Another aspect, or another possible explanation, is that it would be, in comparative terms, cheaper for them to rely on these countries because in this way, if we go back to my example earlier of the $100, if I buy the artillery shells directly from North Korea, I can pay them $1, and then so I have 99 still left for the rest. But if I want to produce those artillery shells in-house, it would cost me 10 or 15 or 20, at least for the beginning, and this would affect the entire war front. So it I guess, is a mix of at least these three factors. Probably there are also some others. It definitely points to the fact that Russia is a military power, but is not a maximum superpower, meaning that with a good mix of sanctions, monitoring, weapons deliveries to Ukraine, its military power can be affected. And that's probably the big lesson. The last aspect I want to emphasize is that its dependence on Iranian drones. It's interesting because Iranian drones use semiconductors mostly produced in the West. We know that Russia has a weak, very weak semiconductor industry. Iran doesn't have a semiconductor industry at all, and so it relies on commercial components for its drones. So it's possible that Russia could not access those semiconductors for producing drones. Iran obviously had more experience, and so it was easier to have this access, which means Western countries should try to go harder on the sanctions with Iran in order to curb its supplies of drones to Russia, which raises two political problems. One is about Middle Eastern stability, which between Israel, between the nuclear capabilities of Iran, and the other is about the price, the oil price, which could affect the elections in multiple countries, not least the US. So there are multiple things which intersect, which may affect these issues.
But when we talk about this competition between military production and military strategies, where do you hit your enemy? What kind of weaknesses of your enemy you use to achieve the victory? Can we say that Russia's military power is in decline, economically, politically, technologically? Or have they managed to achieve a sort of stability where they can say, okay, we can run this war for a year or two without any significant problems, and we'll just wait until the Western politicians, being dependent on the public opinion, will just stop supporting Ukraine and step out?
So I think that their bet is exactly what you're saying in the second part of your question. So to be able to withstand a lot of human losses, a lot of production losses, a lot of economic losses due to the sanctions, hoping that at some point Western countries will just be under enormous fatigue. Obviously, Russia disinformation, hybrid measures, and so forth would help these, and so ultimately they could, one way or another, eat up all the eastern Ukraine and maybe the entire country. I don't know exactly how their final plans, but these could be, that's probably their wish. I think that we already seeing some problems in the Russian economy, in the Russian society, in the Russian production systems, which the central bank is admitting itself. I mean, an official from, I think, the central bank yesterday said the new wave of sanctions are a death blow to the Russian economy. So if Western countries have the moral internal resources to withstand those hybrid measures, disinformation, hybrid attacks we have seen in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in France, to withstand the wave of disinformation which will try to undermine the elections. Obviously, many other dynamics. They are able to not be afraid by the bullying of Russia on the nuclear ladder. Anytime something happens, Russia used the nuclear threat in order to freeze the support, and they keep going. I think it's hard for Russia to go on, and so at the end we see over past 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we saw a number of reshufflings in the Kremlin and in the broader political elite. And at some point, really, the hope is that somebody in Russia will say, "This thing doesn't make any sense. So let's go back and it's over." Obviously, will take 6 months, 2 years, 5 years. I don't know. My feeling is that Western countries should do everything possible to accelerate this trend. It's for Ukraine, Ukrainian population, but very selfishly is also for our own security, because it's, defeating Russia is also a key part of making Europe safe and free. And so, and I hope that we have now seen that the new European elections occur, a new commission will be created, and hopefully that will be their direction. But obviously, that's my personal view.
Can Ukraine halt for another couple of years? Ukraine has problems with mobilization. Ukraine is still lacking some types of military equipment. We are observing this debate about the jets, when the jets will come, but it's not only about the jets, it's about other types of equipment, up to battle tanks, artillery, with which needs maintenance, because you cannot fire that much shells from an artillery piece without exchanging the barrel itself, etc., etc. The Ukrainian soldiers are brave. The Ukrainian society is willing to win, but they are sacrificing their lives and their future practically by holding back the Russian invasion.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. So I think there are different challenges. One is definitely about just a simple number of losses versus new force generation capacities. So in brutal terms, if you suffer n number of losses, can you regenerate the forces to replace those losses? And obviously, over time is difficult for different reasons. Also, because Ukraine needs to have a functioning economy. So if you send people, you remove people from the economy and you send them on the front, the economy is going to weaken, and a weakening economy is then less able to generate forces later on. So that's a first cynical mathematical problem, if you want, in terms of numbers. One which is not mathematical but is more emotional is how much the Ukrainian population is willing to endure these this situation. And I mean, these dynamics are difficult to predict. Throughout history, we have seen very different patterns. Some countries willing to go through hardship for a long time, other being willing and able to sustain hardship and then hardship falling down. So this resilience, moral societal resilience, if you want, falling down very rapidly at some point. I obviously hope that they can continue, but at the same time, I think Western countries have a moral and strategic duty to help them the more they can. Obviously, if we provide all their defense systems, the war will be less heavy hitting on the broader Ukrainian population. If we provide more armored capabilities, there will be less losses. If we provide more long-range munitions, we can strike the Russian capabilities before they arrive on the front. So there are a set of issues, and that's the second aspect. The third is really about the mobilization and about how much troops you need to achieve your political objectives, and which are the political objectives. Meaning, is it just trying to reclaim Crimea and then trade Crimea for the eastern part of the country, reclaim only part of the country, really pushing back Russia further away, which are different political objectives. And understandably, Ukraine is ambivalent because being too straightforward about the political goals would undermine the underlying military strategy. So it probably depends on these, but it's a challenge, and we cannot, at least as analysts, I cannot hide myself that it's not going to be an easy path, and some unknown or unexpected developments could occur either way, both on the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side.
We are still in the middle of this long way with a lot of unknown parameters, militarily, technologically, politically, and the goals are not still completely defined by all the players. We know what are Ukrainian goals, but we're not sure if any European or Western country is exactly as decisive about understanding what are their goals or our goals in this war. It was a conversation with Professor Andrea Gilli, who is a lecturer at the University of St. Andrews and an expert in technological aspects of modern warfare. Thank you for this interview.
Well, thanks to you, and looking forward to meet you again. Thanks to all.
Thank you again, and don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel so you will never miss an interview like this.